Hello and welcome to the Nutrition Digest podcast. We're your hosts and registered dietitians, Alicia Kugler, Tara Valenti, and Summer Merrick-Williams, here to dish up the nutrition tea, dispel the myths, inspire, inform, and hopefully entertain. Today is part 2 of our weight loss mini-series, and we are discussing a very hot topic today. GLP-1 medications like Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro. What's the deal with all of these? The drugs are everywhere right now. From TikTok, Instagram, your doctor's office. I'm now seeing billboards in public transit about it. You cannot get away from them. In today's episode, we unpack the science, the pros, the side effects, and what it means for long-term health and weight loss. A quick reminder, before we get started, none of the information we share in our podcast should be considered medical advice. Everything we share is for informational purposes only.
All right, let's talk about what these things are. I think most people have heard of them at this point. Like Alicia said, they're everywhere. They are on commercials when you watch TV, billboards. Everybody knows someone who's taking one. Everyone has an opinion about it. Let's talk about what these things actually are from a scientific standpoint. So GLP-1 stands for glucagon-like peptide 1. Technically, they're receptor agonist medications. They mimic the action of a natural hormone that we all release in our guts normally. So all of us has a little bit of GLP-1 in us right now. We naturally produce this. GLP-1 increases the insulin response. It slows gastric emptying. So that's the rate at which your stomach empties itself. It also reduces appetite and it suppresses glucagon after eating. Glucagon is a hormone that is involved in blood sugar regulation. It was originally developed to treat type 2 diabetes, but it has been now approved to be used for weight loss. And that is where a lot of the attention is coming from.
The magic pill.
Yes, a lot of people are kind of referring to it as that. Like we've always said, there is no magic pill, but GLP-1s kind of seem like they're being viewed that way now. There's a lot of different types of GLP-1s out in this space now. Semaglutide is one, also known as Ozempic or Wegovy. Most people have heard of those. I think Ozempic is like the household name that we all think of when we think of GLP-1s. There's tirzepatide, which is, I say Mounjaro, but maybe that's like the Californian in me. When I see a J, I pronounce it like an H, which is probably wrong. There's also liraglutide, which is also known as Saxenda, and many, many more. So regardless of which one you have heard of or maybe taking yourself, they all act in a very similar way and have basically a similar mechanism.
And they've been around for a long time.
Yes.
I remember when I was going through my undergrad and my master's and learning about like diabetes, Victoza was all the thing back then for diabetes. So it's just interesting how it's shifted.
Right. So why are these popular? I think we can all guess. They tend to cause significant weight loss in individuals, up to 15 to 20% of body weight. They also tend to reduce food cravings and something called food noise, which you may have heard of or may have experienced yourself. Typically, they are done by weekly injections, and usually in the beginning, you don't really need to make much in the way of lifestyle changes, although that really depends on the individual. And they're seen as a breakthrough for obesity management. They've been getting a lot of attention because they are highly effective in individuals who are hoping to lose weight. Let's talk about how they actually work in the body. So GLP-1 medications have an impact on blood sugar. They slow glucose absorption, they improve insulin sensitivity, and they lower A1C in people with type 2 diabetes. So from a blood sugar standpoint, these are extremely helpful in individuals who are struggling with blood sugar regulation. Maybe they've had an elevated A1C for a long time that they've been battling, and maybe nutrition changes and lifestyle changes are just not cutting it. And they take this medication and it helps them to regulate their blood sugar. It also has an impact on your appetite and satiety, or a sense of fullness. So it acts on hunger regulating areas in the brain. As I mentioned before, it slows gastric emptying, which is going to cause you to feel fuller sooner and longer, which is what oftentimes is causing people to feel like they're able to better control portion sizes because they're just physically not able to eat as much because their stomach is feeling full pretty soon after they start eating. It can also reduce your interest in food altogether. So something that I have seen commonly in my practice is specific food aversions. So individuals who start taking GLP-1s experience sudden disgust with certain food groups or certain types of foods. And they're just like, actually animal meat is a really common one. Suddenly they're not able to eat animal meat or they're just grossed out by it. And so we have to find a workaround because protein is very, very important when you're taking a GLP-1 medication. So it can reduce your interest in food. You just don't think about it as much. And it can mess with your appetite in these kind of odd ways that you might not originally expect. Typically, when you're starting a GLP-1, you start at a low dose and then increase slowly over 4 to 8 weeks or more. Doing it that way helps to reduce some of the side effects. So common side effects are nausea, bloating, constipation, lots of GI issues. I've definitely known some people personally who have experienced significant GI issues, struggle with fatigue, and just haven't been feeling very well once they started their GLP-1. Some people actually go off of a GLP-1 for those exact reasons. It just makes them feel terrible. Other people don't experience that. They don't have any side effects that they consider to be negative, and so it's maybe a better fit for them. Ideally, people who are taking GLP-1s are also including supportive follow-up within their treatment plan. So that means working with a registered dietitian to make sure that nutrition is dialed in, working with their medical doctor, working with a therapist as necessary to make sure that they're covering all the bases so that you're getting the best results that you possibly can from taking these medications, because there's a lot of areas where we can go wrong here. So we'll dive into that in a little bit more detail in a second here.
Yeah, so adding on to a little bit more about the side effects and what they can mean. As Tara mentioned, some of the common side effects are nausea, constipation, vomiting, diarrhea, and they can sometimes, for some patients or some people, be so off-putting and debilitating that they just go off of it. It just doesn't work. Other times you need to mess with your dose and kind of play around with it a little bit, go on a smaller dose at the beginning and let your body regulate to that before increasing dosage. The GLP-1s can also reduce your appetite, but that can unfortunately lead to a lot of instances of underfueling, especially in terms of protein. There's, as Tara mentioned, aversion that's very common to protein, especially animal proteins. And this can lead to not getting the nutrients in our body that we need on a daily basis. It's super, super important that when you are on it, that you are still trying to eat a well-balanced meal, even if it is less food. Also, early satiety, you get fuller faster. So that can, again, lead to a low nutrient intake or low protein intake. Some of the serious but rare complications can be a risk of gallstones or pancreatitis, and they can worsen existing GI conditions such as GERD or IBS. So something to really keep in mind and discuss with your doctor if these things are happening, and how to incorporate the GLP-1s and still maintain a healthy, nutrient-dense diet. So GI side effects usually mean that the dose is too high, like I mentioned, or your diet isn't adjusted right. You most likely, if you are on a GLP-1, you're going to have to make some adjustment to your diet. And you may not know exactly what that's going to be until you are on it. Also, long-term risks with not eating enough can be muscle loss, fatigue, and nutrient deficiencies. Another really important thing about GLP-1s is they can cause muscle depletion. You can lose muscle mass on GLP-1. So really making sure to incorporate that protein. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure Alicia's going to talk about that a little bit more, is going to be really, really important.
Yeah, we were talking a lot about making sure that when you're in the GLP-1 that you have that supportive system, and that does include a dietitian, meaning that you're taking your nutrition into consideration. I have heard of people that they go in the GLP-1s and they don't have that support there. They're not able to stay on it, or they find they end up in a place where they eventually try to wean off of it and their metabolism is all out of whack, that they weight regain. And we're going to talk about that as well. So it's definitely something important. Like your appetite, we know is going to be lower. You might have some food aversions. Your protein and your calories are going to be a lot lower. And some people, they just forget to eat altogether. And so we risk a lot of that muscle loss that we talked about. We also risk a lot of dehydration because you just don't have that same cue sometimes to even like drink water, and you can end up with hypoglycemia in active people. So quite a few people, they are working out, they're doing a lot of really good things with their diet and their exercise. People are working on their journey, and this is just a tool that they're using. And maybe because they aren't thinking about food or their appetite is really low, they don't fuel the same way, even in terms of carbohydrates, and they end up with hypoglycemia, which is a really awful feeling.
And what is hypoglycemia again?
Hypoglycemia is low blood sugar.
Right.
So for some people, it can be related to more insulin sensitivity, that they ate a certain amount of carbs and their body's all of a sudden more insulin sensitive, and then their blood sugars crash. And it can be related to under eating carbs in general over the course of the day. So there's a few different kind of causes there. The lower appetite causes people to prioritize foods generally that they want to eat rather than foods that they know that they should be eating. In some cases, we're not saying this is for everyone. And so for us, we're not seeing the same nutrient density that in their diet. So it's really important for some individuals to find ways to have the balance between foods that they actually prefer to eat and foods that are going to help them feel good.
This is something that I've actually seen in someone that I know, and they got on a GLP-1. They were super excited. They actually had diabetes and were trying to lose weight. And the GLP-1 was excellent for blood sugar regulation. They started losing weight. They didn't start exercising. They were very, very inactive and just continued being inactive. And because their appetite was so dramatically reduced, they were prioritizing the tasty stuff. And because they still wanted to enjoy pleasure from food, but they just had such a low appetite that they were like, well, I'll just have like 1 or 2 bites of the actual meal and save room for the dessert. Doing that over a long period of time is just a recipe for disaster. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things that can be really helpful to work with a professional so that they can help you to figure out how to find some level of balance. Sure, enjoy the foods that bring you joy and make you happy. We don't want to take that away, but it's also so critical to make sure that you're getting the nutrients that you need to actually support your physiological health, to help keep inflammation under control, like so many different important things.
Especially with the individual with diabetes, like yes, the medication will help to regulate blood sugars, but is not necessarily a magic cure. So right. If they're saving up space for dessert, that might be a recipe for things not to go super well.
100%. And the other side of it is the physical activity and the exercise. So I think sometimes there is this disconnect where people think that weight loss is equal to getting healthy. And it's really not that simple. It's not weight loss at any cost. We need to focus on keeping our bodies healthy and fueling ourselves the best way possible, and not thinking of weight loss as equivalent to health. They're not the same thing. They're very different. And just losing body weight does not mean you are necessarily getting healthier.
Yeah, and that's why having a team to support you and making sure that we're doing other things beyond just having foods that are tasty, finding that balance. And there's some strategies that definitely can help that. And one thing that I always say too is like, maybe there's ways to take foods that you may like that are really, really tasty. Like maybe you're someone that loves bread. Maybe we can swap that bread for something that's a little bit higher protein. Okay, maybe you love like a yogurt parfait with like granola on it. Okay, so how can we maybe swap in like a different higher protein yogurt? Like there's protein pastas that are available. Like obviously you kind of tell the trend that I'm trying to get you to prioritize protein, because that is the big thing on GLP-1s, and that will help with muscle loss and help combat that. So shakes, smoothies, I find for people that I've seen in my practice, liquid nutrition works really, really well. So shakes, there's now protein water that exists, which is a very interesting, like a lot of my clients that are more actually Australia, New Zealand, and in Asia, they love the different products there. Like the protein water is like something they definitely rely on, and electrolytes to kind of help make sure they're not any of that dehydration. Smaller frequent meals, like For some of the side effects around feeling nauseous, feeling lightheaded, things like that, it could be more hypoglycemia. It could be not getting enough calories in, and making sure you're eating smaller, more frequent meals and snacks can be a really good way, especially if you can't tolerate a lot in one sitting. That's just like an easy way, and finding ways to kind of get as much taste and nutrient density into each time that you eat. So kind of having a little bit more of like a plan in place versus just kind of going through your day willy-nilly without actually thinking about it. So that planning piece. And then on the muscle preservation side, making sure we're trying to think about some resistance training so that we can actually have that stimulus there, especially if you are of the older population as well. When we add the GLP-1 in and you're losing weight, we get a little bit concerned too about bone density, as we've talked about in previous kind of episodes. And so we want to make sure that we have that resistance training in there to preserve both the muscle mass and the bone density, and make sure that we're also keeping your metabolism in a good place, because if we're losing weight and we're potentially losing it from muscle mass, like your metabolism is going to conk, and that could really affect the end point and that maintenance in the long term. So we want to think about making sure that we are getting the minimum energy in and hitting that minimum protein. And I think kind of considering who the best candidates are really important for this. So Tara, tell us a little bit more about who would be the best candidate, who maybe needs to have some caution around GLP-1s.
Yeah. So when you were talking about metabolism and stuff, my brain was just going off, because I was thinking about how I often see people on very low calorie diets when they're on GLP-1s. And it's just like, you can only think about what's happening to their metabolism, because they're eating sometimes calories in the triple digits, like 700, 800 calories a day. And it's just really extremely difficult to get the nutrients that you need when you're eating so few calories. But B, oh my gosh, your metabolism.
A lot of these people, they're not intentionally eating that little. It's just they don't necessarily have the same desire to eat as much, and they don't realize that that's what's actually happening.
Or they physically can't.
Which is why working with a nutrition professional can be so incredibly helpful. Sometimes they don't know that they're eating that few calories either. They're just going based on how they feel. And eating too little for most of these individuals has never been a problem they've had. So it's just super foreign to them. That's where working with someone like us and starting to track your food, at least for a temporary period of time, to get a grasp on where you're at, where your gaps are, if you need to increase in one area or decrease in another area, can be just absolutely eye-opening and an amazing tool.
Yeah, that's one population that for sure I make sure that they track their food at some point, whether it's the beginning or the middle or whatever, because it's very eye-opening for them, and we can get a lot more into the protein and calorie intake piece of the puzzle versus maybe with other populations I wouldn't automatically jump to tracking, but I think it's very important for them.
So let's talk about who may benefit from a GLP-1 versus who might want to use a little bit more caution before diving into taking one of these medications. And before I talk about this topic, I want to just remind everyone, we are not medical doctors here. So if you are trying to decide whether or not a GLP-1 would be right for you, definitely talk with your physician to get some guidance on that. We are not here to do that during this podcast. So in terms of people that might benefit from taking a GLP-1, typically individuals with a BMI over 30 or over 27 if they have comorbidities that are related to obesity. So those are kind of the baseline body mass index recommendations, or I should say guidelines that we look at for recommending GLP-1s to individuals. Also, if a person has type 2 diabetes, or if they have insulin resistance, a GLP-1 might be beneficial to them. People with high food preoccupation, emotional eating, or binging tendencies might also benefit from taking a GLP-1 because they do have that ability to reduce food noise. And so in those individuals, it might help to reduce the preoccupation, the emotional eating, the binging tendencies. I definitely have seen people who have taken GLP-1s who I've thought, wow, this is absolutely amazing. This is such an amazing tool for them. And I've seen other individuals where I thought, this might not be the right fit for various different reasons. I did know someone who had genetic obesity, and she started taking a GLP-1 medication, and it totally changed her life in a very positive way. She didn't experience any negative side effects, none of the stuff that we've talked about. And she reported back to me that what she noticed from the medication was primarily just that instead of eating very, very large portions of food, she was now eating what she considered to be the appropriate portion of food for her. So it wasn't like she was under eating. It wasn't like she was cutting out certain nutrients. She was still exercising regularly, strength training, hiking, going on backpacking trips, just eating a little bit less than she had before. And the results were absolutely mind-blowing. So some people are absolute wonderful candidates. Some people benefit enormously from these medications. Whereas I will say other individuals might not be a good fit.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to add on a story to that. Like I have one individual that I know that I was a little bit apprehensive when they had kind of shared that they were going on a GLP-1 initially. And then this individual got onto the GLP-1 and it was a life-altering thing for her. She, all of a sudden, she had a lot of preoccupation around food. She was very much someone that was like consuming all of her thoughts. What am I eating next? What am I eating? How many calories does this have? Oh, there's this food in the cupboard. This is a trigger food. I'm going to eat it all. I can't control myself. And that noise went away and she felt like she could eat like a normal human and not have her brain. And she had a lot of trigger food from binging episodes and in the past. And she's now able to have those there at home. So it's like, I think that's something that's like really big, that it's like, yeah, you know what? I think there is a reason why it exists and why there's people that benefit from it.
Definitely. So who should be cautious about taking GLP-1 medications? Individuals who are lean or underweight might want to use extra caution and just, again, make sure you have a conversation with your doctor to see if this is a good fit for you, because GLP-1s do tend to cause people to eat less and people to lose body weight. If you're already underweight or very, very lean, it might not be physically beneficial for you to be losing more weight. So that's something to consider. Athletes that have high performance demands might not be good candidates for a GLP-1. Again, very individually based, but that's something to think about if you are performing at a very high level, if your training is very, very intense. A GLP-1 and the effects that it has might not be ideal for you. In some cases, those with a history of eating disorders or disordered eating might not do well with GLP-1s if the individual has a history of very restrictive eating behavior. Taking a GLP-1 medication might not be the most ideal thing for obvious reasons. And then people with certain GI disorders, so gastroparesis, for example. So as we know, these medications slow gastric emptying. So if you have a disorder that is related to impaired gastric emptying, that could just make things worse for you. Again, talk to your doctor to see if this might be a good fit for you or not, but it's something to take into consideration if you have a GI issue like that. And then sometimes people are unwilling to adopt long-term habits and they just want to use the medication as a quick fix. So if you haven't tried making the changes first with your exercise, with your nutrition, changing your lifestyle, and you just want to get straight on the medication, that's kind of a band-aid for the bigger picture issue here, sort of aligned with what I was talking about before. We need to make sure that the diet is dialed in, that you're nourishing your body as well as you possibly can, that you're moving your body regularly, that you're getting in some strength training, that you're doing some activity that increases your heart rate regularly, that we've got those kind of foundational bases covered before we add a medication to the mix. So I would say for many individuals, step one isn't a GLP-1. We need to start dialing in those other pieces first. And that's not even just nutrition and exercise. We also need to look at the other holistic pieces of health and make sure that we're taking care of our bodies the best way that we possibly can. And obviously we're not going for perfection first, like that's unrealistic. But I would say for many individuals, it's better to make sure that we're covering the foundational stuff before adding medication to the mix.
One thing I just wanted to add in really quick, and you just touched on it, and I think it's really important for those who are considering looking into taking a GLP-1 or starting a program with a GLP-1, is it is not a quick fix. This is not something that you can jump on and jump off of. And I think that's where we miss some of that when we're looking at social media. It looks like a lot of these people that we see on Instagram or in the news that are famous who can just afford to get on it for whatever reason. It seems like they're just doing it for a short time, and that isn't good for you. Like, it actually has harmful side effects, and it can make keeping the weight off even harder, or continuing to lose weight. It can make that a lot harder. And I know, Alicia, you're going to touch on that a little bit now, but it is incredibly important to remember and to note and to stress that this is not a short-term thing that you can just dip in and dip out of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like a lot of people don't realize that it's really just the beginning, or like it's like a part of your journey if you're on a GLP-1, because there's so much that happens after the fact, and even tapering the dosage and things like that, because we see a lot of people that go off of it, and that appetite suppression that you have when you're on it, that can come back to haunt you, and your appetite can return with a vengeance. I've heard of people that they go off of it, and then it's just like they want to eat everything in the kitchen sink. So you have to make sure that in order to prevent that, we're setting some foundation in terms of lifestyle change. We are making sure that we're maximizing the metabolism while we're on it, because we don't want that muscle mass during the weight loss phase. We have to kind of think about, this is just one phase in the journey. This isn't the end. And I think when we see those celebrity stories online or the social media stories, we don't necessarily think about, okay, what is next? We just see, hey, they're at the end result now. And that needs to be that shift in our mindset when we think about the GLP-1s. When we're thinking about how to minimize that regain, because ultimately nobody wants to regain weight. Doesn't matter if you're on a GLP-1 or another fat loss journey, we do not want to have that regain, because then I feel like for some individuals, that is it's a negative feeling. Not for some individuals, all individuals, it's a negative feeling. You want to see the GLP-1 as more of a tool. It's not a magic fix. It's not the cure. It's a tool at your disposal. We need to kind of look at more of a holistic, comprehensive approach. So are we strength training? Are we walking? Are we looking at our habits? Are we working on the mindset around food? Are we making sure that we're tracking our food, getting all the right nutrients in? If we have kind of gone through a period where our appetite's a little bit lower, have we worked on that sustainable nutrition habit that we can maintain? Even working on things like, hey, you know what? I have a little appetite. Maybe I'm going to practice meal prepping and meal planning so I can be a little bit more intentional, because maybe food isn't the top of mind like previous times, so that when I transition off of the medication, I have those habits already in place, and it is easy for me to go back to normal life, or easier than if you don't think about that and you're just kind of being like, hey, I don't have to think about food. I can just eat whatever. You also want to make sure that you're reassessing body composition whenever you can. So do a DEXA, see what's happening to your body. If we're noticing that, okay, my muscle mass is going down, okay, let's reassess. What are we doing in terms of food? What are we doing in terms of movement? How is that all coming together? And adjust the plan so that we're not ending up in a situation where you're now at a place of sarcopenic obesity and we have no muscle mass coming into that kind of like weight stabilization period. These meds are very powerful, yes, but they're not for everyone. I think a lot of times, and like we shouldn't judge people, I would say also too, that are choosing to have it. You know what, this is a cool tool that for a lot of people, but we also want to make sure that we're kind of like understanding there's a bigger piece of the puzzle. We still need to make sure we're eating enough. We still need to make sure we're being intentional about our movement. We still need to work on that relationship with food.
To wrap it all up, GLP-1s work by regulating the appetite, insulin, and digestion, but come with trade-offs. Nutrition and strength training are essential to preserve health and muscle, and dietitians can help ensure long-term success, not just short-term weight loss. And we want to think about making sure to talk to a healthcare team before starting. Get all the facts, do your research, really look into it, and don't think of just jumping on the bandwagon because you see someone on social media doing it. It's not that easy. It can be incredibly helpful, but it's not a quick fix. We want to make sure we're focusing on protein, nutrient density, resistance training, and hydration if you're on these medications. Super, super important. And also, please share this episode with anybody who's curious about GLP-1s. There's a lot of good stuff here, and I think it can be really helpful for a lot of different people. Thanks again for joining us, and have a wonderful day.